Light of the Seven Kingdoms turned out to be almost the perfect story for the setting of Westeros, but that doesn't mean it hasn't still left me with some concerns for its potential future. Now for context, while I am pretty caught up on Westeros history, I'm not exactly a lore buff. My knowledge primarily boils down to a lot of its bigger events and its more notable characters. That being said, when it came to the Hedge Knight, the book the series is based off of, I only really knew of the events like Summerhall and Dunk's potential relation to Brienne of Tarth, which, seeing how her story plays out within the universe, you can see a lot of the similarities. That being said, I wanted to go into the Hedge Knight stories completely blind. So, going into this series, I didn't really have a solid idea of anything that would be going down, which made the series that much more shocking. And no, I don't mean shocking in the sense that there's an undead army coming or a giant dragon just burned a bunch of people down. I mean shocking in the sense that there is an odd amount of both happy moments and humor spread throughout this show. Being such a fan of the universe and knowing some parts of its history, I just fully expected a tragic story. And while there are some sadder elements, trust me, we'll get to that, I did find majority of this series to be extremely wholesome, following a tall, lovable oaf who kinda resembles someone as if they were raised by both Hodor and the Hound, him becoming a hedge knight and traveling Westeros to find his place. And we've seen road trips go down within the series of Game of Thrones, and they're either instantaneous and off-screen, or they're a relatively miserable experience. So it was nice to follow this sort of honorable character as he tries to make his way through a lot of the more darker politics of the world, as he travels with his squire, a squire named Egg, who is actually a more endearing character than I thought he would be. These two characters actually perfectly balance each other out. One is small and weak, but extremely smart, and one is taller and able to fight, but relatively not the brightest bulb. Not only was Egg's actor giving a really great performance, but he also was capable of bringing a bit more Targaryen confidence that we don't really get to see with a lot of the child actors playing Targaryens throughout the universe. But he isn't necessarily cruel. Sure, he's a little manipulative, but that just goes with the royal nature of things. And compared to the rest of his bloodline, he's a relatively good dude. A big highlight for me with his character was when Dunk got a silly little prophecy, and then Egg gets hit with a cosmic future PTSD flashbang.
You shall be king and die in hot fire, and worms shall feed upon your ashes, and all who know you shall rejoice in your dying.
What?
The way they quickly move on from the scene really solidified the humor of the moment. See, you don't have to discount this prophecy as it is likely true, but it is very different of a sequence compared to that of, let's say, House of the Dragon and Rhaenyra.
Do you wish to know your death, child?
That was a much more somber affair and much more fitting for the circumstances at play. This story focuses instead on the joyous nature of people coming together. People who maybe even are royalty and like to party, like the Laughing Storm in Lionel Baratheon. This character is easily my favorite throughout this entire first season, and I'm excited to see where he potentially goes in the future. His introduction being very similar to that of the other politics you see in Westeros until Dunk reveals he's just kind of a real one. And Lionel genuinely enjoys this, dropping his facade and more embracing his obnoxiously bold Baratheon nature. I enjoyed seeing their back and forths and how they try to one-up each other in different ways, and how they both bring each other out of their shells and allow themselves to be more social and living in this environment where there's so much cruelty everywhere else. Lionel Baratheon's perspective on the world seems to be pretty consistent, him not really taking things too seriously and ready to put his life on the line when it counts without any fear.
I was about to miss a chance to bloody up the King's Guard in their pretty white gowns.
Lionel's so much like a combination of Oberyn Martell and Robert Baratheon, being just unapologetically himself in almost every scene. I think he truly does sense the realness in Dunk, and that same realness is what helps us navigate through this crazy world of Westeros. See, in other stories we've seen, you don't know if some of the small folk are just gonna mug you, all of them seeming so miserable and unhappy. And part of that reason is most of the stories take place during war times. But that being said, it was nice just to see a lot of the small folk coming together and enjoying the small bit of peace they can when it comes to a lot of the other power players taking a break from all the murdering and killing and war, I guess. This show is genuinely just a really well shot story. I mean, just look at the parallels between Duncan crying in the rain here. And while the humor did push it for me a bit, more specifically with that snorting character who genuinely wanted to make me break my headset every time he was on screen, it's just so nice to take a break from the political tyranny or the world-ending apocalypse. No more death and carnage and fighting. Just a story of happy times where there's no gratuitous violence. Just so much peace. No, but in actuality, the gritty nature of this series really highlights its brighter aspects for me. For once, we don't have to worry about the world ending, but that doesn't mean the people of Westeros haven't been getting down in the mud throughout their history. I thoroughly enjoyed the fight scenes, and I'm not even joking when I think these are some of the best shot battle sequences we've had in the entire franchise. Sure, maybe it's not on as grand of a scale as the Battle of the Bastards, but it definitely lasted 6 or 7 times longer than The Long Night. Either way, the angles of the fighting and the subtle jump cuts were really impressive, but even more so was how interesting they ended up making the jousting look. This is some of the most entertaining jousting I've seen in any medieval story. I specifically want to highlight that straight up video game shot of zooming into first person for Dunk's POV. And part of me wishes this series was a little longer so we could get to know some of the knights fighting, especially the ones that were involved in the trial. But that still doesn't mean we didn't get some solid characters to enter this whole battle altogether. We got the Fossaways, who I thoroughly expected Raymond Fossaway to die in this entire ordeal. But it was cool to see the underdog rise up to the occasion and take on his cousin. You already know he's going to be the best warrior in the family, and he's never going to let his cousin live this down if he's still alive. Someone did claim that their story was pretty important to the rest of Westeros history, and I would love some elaboration on that if anyone knows down below, as long as it doesn't spoil this series too much. And while the other Fossaway cousin was an annoying asshole, I could say Aerion Targaryen was just an asshole, and an extremely entertaining one at that. The idea he tries to act like a dragon and gets offended at a dragon losing a puppet show could easily come off as extremely childish or Joffrey-like, but in this case it actually adds a lot to the character's lack of confidence he keeps demonstrating, which is interesting to me, as usually it's the Targaryens' overconfidence that gets them into trouble.
Thank the gods! Check out it!
And not lack thereof. See, despite him starting this entire ordeal, he had the opportunity to face Duncan one-on-one, but instead chose a trial by 7. A bit cowardly, and even his father calls this out. Which, if you actually look at the fight itself, Aerion did have a pretty solid chance of winning that 1v1. Sure, you could make the argument Dunk took many hits before they officially started fighting, but let's just remember who gave him that first hit, successfully dehorsing Duncan. There was also multiple times throughout the fight that he had Duncan on the ropes and was interrupted by another opponent. Shouts out Raymond. It's possible his confidence was shaken after Duncan knocked him around a bit in the puppet tent. But to be fair, he was also caught off guard and completely weaponless. Sure, in a fist fight, Aerion's gonna get bodied no matter what, but if you put a sword in his hand, I think he actually outmatches Dunk. These qualities and faults make his character so interesting for me, and I would say I'm excited to see where the story goes with him, but unfortunately after looking up their fight scene on YouTube again, I got a YouTube short that played a Game of Thrones clip that completely spoiled where his character ends up. So spoiler alert if you for some reason don't know, but his character does get the nickname Bright Flame because he literally tries to drink wildfire to prove he's a dragon. Yeah, it was just one of those YouTube edits where it played the scene from Game of Thrones and then cut to some really loud obnoxious song and an edit of the character. Why people feel the need to add edits to their videos, I'll never know. Either way, Aerion wasn't the only Targaryen carrying his team. You also had Prince Baelor on the field. This character very much reminded me of Barristan Selmy if he was a bit younger, and every time his character was on screen amongst the rest of the Targaryens, I felt a little safer for Duncan. and when the fight came down to it, he stepped up and did what was right. A very honorable guy, and I was eager to see some of his combat prowess. What I was not expecting was to see that his brother, Maekar, was such a beast on the battlefield. This dude not only dismounted the Laughing Storm on foot, but also took on 2 other knights trying to get to his son. Fortunately, in this process, he also nailed his brother just a bit too hard, resulting in what could have been Westeros' best ruler dying in the trial by 7. You really have to wonder what a ruler like Baelor could have done for the universe of A Song of Ice and Fire altogether, especially seeing that he fought alongside Lionel Baratheon, and their bond could have potentially grown to the point that Robert Baratheon's rebellion never went down in the first place. And I'm sure there's many other reasons he would have been a great ruler too, but you would have to let me know down below what you think. Either way, it's very obvious this shook up the entire Targaryen family at the line, and it proves that Maekar was not necessarily a cruel or malicious dude. Sure, he had that Targaryen pride about him, but he had deep regrets for what happened to his brother. And I honestly don't really blame the dude. He was trying to defend his son, who was an asshole and started this entire situation in the first place. Which means his and Aryen's relationship probably isn't the most rock solid from this point going forward. This whole ordeal just proves that this isn't just a silly little Happy Knight's tale that's a spin-off of the main big stuff, but is actually a historical, pivotal piece of the narrative taking place within A Song of Ice and Fire, showing almost that everybody within this world has a part to play. If only that part to play wasn't just building towards a very anticlimactic battle with the Night King. Which sort of leads to why I have some concerns with this series. See, while I haven't read the Hedge Knight books, I do know that they aren't finished, and considering how long George likes to take to write things, I doubt it's going to be finished anytime soon, if not ever. However, it does seem like George is maybe, instead of putting all that effort into a book, putting it into working with the showrunner of this series, and maybe just allowing the narrative to develop there. However, I have also heard that he worked closely with the writers of House of the Dragon, and that relationship definitely didn't remain as consistent. This, coupled with the fact that I saw somewhere there was a headline they announced they could do possibly 15 seasons of this show. I don't know. Recently in our world, we've seen a lot of scary history repeating itself. It seems that could potentially also be the case with Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. In that Game of Thrones, and a big reason it fell off by the end, was that the writers not only ran out of source material, but supposedly kept the show going so long they lost interest in their own project. I truly believe that gaining success does inevitably lead to a different creative appetite at some point. See, I'm not going to go into a rant about Game of Thrones, as everyone probably already heard one already, but I will say that it felt like just bullet points of a story that George gave them that they had no idea how to connect contextually. And should this be the same method for the production and behind the scenes of Hedge Knight, we just have to cross our fingers that their relationship and working together remains consistent. Sure, they are dealing with a smaller scale story and a lot less characters. That doesn't necessarily mean they can't milk these characters to the point they become redundant. And don't get me wrong, while Game of Thrones is something I try to keep out of my mind, I actually still really enjoy House of the Dragon. And I'll definitely be covering it here on the channel once it finally returns. Still, it's a risky game committing to turning short-form novellas into long-form storytelling. With what we've seen, I'm pretty optimistic. Sure, every other series starts off very strongly, but there's just something different about this first season of the new A Song of Ice and Fire spin-off. It seems this story could be just what the universe needed to capture life living in this world. And despite all my concerns for its future, I truly believe that Knight of the Seven Kingdoms can be just that. But I want to know what you think. Are you concerned for the series' future? Are there any lore moments that you're really excited to see play out or explained? And what are your theories on some of these prophecies we've gotten in regards to Summerhall? Either way, if you enjoyed the video, liking and supporting does mean a lot. Otherwise, feel free to check back in when we're covering House of the Dragon.